Hello and welcome back to DruckerTV, to our studio interview. We are in the book corner because we have a very special guest today. Next to me is Roger Spitz. He is an international best-selling author, a futurist. He's also the president of Tech Essential and the chair of the renowned Disruptive Futures Institute. Roger wrote a book very recently, which you can see in the table in front of me, and I also have it here. I just got a free copy. I feel so lucky. It's called Disrupt with Impact. So, Roger, can you tell us about the content of your book? What is the main message or the main takeaway?
Yeah, that's the key start, right? I think we're in times of a wonderful opportunity, but we also have a number of challenges which are quite complex. And so the idea of disrupt, we use it in the sense that's not the sort of technocentric product or technological or innovation. It's really thinking more of constant change and the status quo, which is probably not going to get us to solve the greatest challenges of the world. So the disrupt is meaning we are forced to become change agents. And with impact, it needs to be effective. So it's not enough just to change for the sake of change or to break things. You need to break the status quo because that's not working, but it needs to be effective change. What does that look like?
You have a lot of different frameworks in your book, a lot of very concrete things that help us put these things into action. And you also write about mindsets that we all need to better embrace uncertainty. And I love this. You wrote keys to not just surviving, but thriving on disruption. You came up with the 6 I's. Can you share with us what are the 6 I's? What are the mindsets that we need to embrace uncertainty?
Yeah, I was kind of trying to put a bit of thought around change and what to do about it and how not to be too affected by it, and realizing that actually with the right mindsets, it's something you can actually embrace. And maybe change is not necessarily a bad thing per se. And the 6 I's is really thinking that there are ways of turning change into something virtuous, but you can't do it necessarily through the knowledge-driven playbook approach of a lot of the world. So the 6 I's are simply inspiration. I think inspiration is contagious when you think passionately about something that's inspiring, not to you, but just to others, and that's important for change makers and multiplier effects. And it's also imagination. A lot of the challenges we have is maybe a failure of imagination, and imagination is extraordinarily important. You then have intuition. I think in a world where there's an inverse relationship between predictability and uncertainty, because of that uncertainty, or thanks to, you basically need some form of intuition to also make decisions and judgment calls, because you won't always have an answer. So that's already imagination, inspiration, and intuition. And then I found that you have improvisation, which in a way is magical, because by definition it's improvised. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. And there are no such mistakes. Mistakes are gifts, and it's a yes-or mentality. And then within that, you also have moved to the 5th one in terms of the impossible. And the impossible is just thinking that some things that might seem impossible or that have been impossible in history don't always end up so. And maybe there's a cure for drug discovery for some of the terrible diseases. Maybe some of the geopolitical or other problematics of our world are solvable and not impossible or intractable. And the final one is really invention. We exist and then invent ourselves, and that's disruption is discontinuous. So the idea of invention versus incremental innovation, of understanding that things can be discontinuous and that you might need a blank page and to look afresh to solve some of our complex challenges. And those are the 6 I's.
Imagination, inspiration, improvisation, intuition,
invention and impossible.
And impossible. They sound like great words. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's also like they're great concepts. How do you, on a daily routine, try to incorporate these 6 I's? What can you give us as tips if we want to also master these skills a little bit more?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something I try to sort of focus on quite a bit, both for my own life, for survival, because I haven't always been, and I'm still perfecting it, but I've not always been that comfortable with uncertainty and that. I come from a background which is very much in M&A and investment banking and that. And also because in the end, there's a so what question, so you need to have something concrete. For me, paradoxically, despite scientific change and progress, it's actually some of the older philosophies that help me stay grounded with these 6 I's on a day-to-day basis. Some of it is existential philosophy, and if you think about Kierkegaard, or Heidegger, or Jean-Paul Sartre, effectively, existence precedes the essence. You exist, and then you create yourself or your beingness, the essence, and that's invention. And that's actually a good thing, because if things were not discontinuous or changing, you could argue that things are predetermined, that you wouldn't have freedom, agency, and choice. So that's a key one. And then beyond existential philosophy, I find Zen Buddhism and Eastern philosophy very, very important. So Shoshin, for instance, beginner's mind. You could argue that beginner's mind is also the first principles, not take assumptions for granted, which has also to do with kind of invention and improvisation and that, or even the idea of transience and mujo, like from the Greeks, you never put your foot in the water twice because the water moves and you're changing, and accepting that change is a constant. And I find that these are very helpful in a very fast-paced, technocentric world to actually realize that they help with pretty much all the 6 I's in different ways, even just those 3 alone around transience, beginner's mind, and the existential nature of we have that freedom, agency, and choice, touch upon inspiration, invention, the impossible, intuition, etc. So I kind of fall back to millennia-old, for some of them, philosophies, which I try and use, I would say, probably much as best as I can on a daily basis.
That's so inspiring. I love that you gave us some very concrete names and book examples. What I'm taking from this is you encourage everyone to read and to continue learning. I'm definitely gonna, The Beginner's Mind, I haven't read it yet. I'm gonna put that on my list. I'd like to make a mental switch. One thing you also talk about in your book is sustainability, and you also talk about sustainable futures and sustainable value creation.
Yeah.
Believe it's sustainability from our conversations beforehand. You care about it a lot.
Yeah.
Can you share more about those 2 concepts with us?
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because it's one that's actually quite layered. So you have sustainable futures in terms of intergenerational, in terms of humanity not becoming extinct and surviving and even ideally thriving. And then you have obviously the specific problematic of climate and sustainability, which are interlinked, because of and the idea with sustainable futures is really thinking that point solutions or quick fixes or playbooks might work well in certain environments for certain things, but when it comes to systems change and complex topics, and as you say, Fran, we were exchanging quite a bit on this early on, it's not a sort of point solution or quick fix. So here you need to understand how systems changes, what are the levers for change, the importance of worldviews, assumptions, and education, which comes back to some of the 6 I's, and how that is the hardest but the most effective lever for change. And then structures and policies and feedback loops and regulation are very important. Incentives determine outcomes, but you really need to not only play across the different levers for change, but also understand which ones are powerful and make sure that they're not either or decisions. They all need to sort of work in sync. And so the idea of sustainable futures is really that one where you're kind of understanding that you're not dealing with enterprise software when you're trying to seek change through systems, and as you experience every day with your own work around these topics, you've got to think in a systems manner, which is unfortunately in a siloed world we know and love and live in. It's not what you're taught at school. It's not always the governance systems or the incentive structures which are organized or in a way that's systemic and effective for systems change.
If you think about how our school system is built up, it's so much about isolated thinking, different subjects that are separated, and we're such masters of analysis, not synthesis. Synthesis, I can say it in English.
No, absolutely.
I believe like this mindset that you're talking about, it has many different components, and one thing is also, and that you also touch upon in your book, I believe, is thinking across different time horizons. That this is very important to create value and future sustainably.
Yeah.
What is this thinking across time horizons for you? How can we teach it? How can we practice it?
Yeah. So it's another way of slicing, how do you thrive on change and that, and maybe it's a more specific framework than the 6 I's and that, but they're all interlinked. And the idea is the following. There are 2 distinctions that are often made as either ors. One is, for instance, thinking long term. So as a futurist, despite what people think, futurists are not trying to predict the future. Anybody who tells me they can predict the future, you should run 1,000,000 miles away. So you're thinking long term and about scenarios, but actually it's to inform decision making today. And so this idea of thinking across different time horizons means that you need to be having a vision of longer-term plausible futures, both to drive towards the preferred ones and to also build resiliency and future preparedness for others that may be less appreciated, but that are not the central case, so you're departing from continuity. But in the end, only the present exists, and it's in the here and now. And again, coming back to Zen Buddhism, the nowness. And so you need to be able to have the agility to reconcile the longer-term thinking with the here and now today. And then there are going to be shocks in the system which you may or not be aware of or prepare for, but you need to build resiliency. And so for us, the thinking different time horizons, we use it as the AAA framework, which is being anticipatory. You're thinking long-term. You have the agility, cognitive, emergent, and strategic agility to reconcile the long-term vision with the emergence in the here and now, which is a discovery process. And then you have foundations which are anti-fragile based on Nassim Taleb, so that whatever shocks happen, and while you're thinking about the agility of the short term and the longer term, you have resilience in the systems, irrespective of what might happen. And ideally, even more than resiliency, you're anti-fragile, so you're strengthening as you get sort of shocks and randomness hit with kind of events that you might not be sort of thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Find it fascinating how you manage to really break down these abstract concepts into frameworks and make them very tangible. It makes me so excited to read the book.
Thank you.
Can you, as a last question, maybe elaborate on why you wanted to write this book? Like, from your heart, why did this want to come out? Why is this your present to the world?
Yeah. There's always reasons which are our own kind of, value of writing a book. There's also values in terms of, one's own economic sustainability and doing things. And I'm not going to pretend those aren't there. What I would say, though, is that I care deeply about these topics because I think for humanity, unfortunately, and you touched upon it, our educational systems are not necessarily addressing an understanding of complexity and system change or the multiplicity of possible futures we need to prepare for. I spent a lot of time with the World Economic Forum and the Global Foresight Network and other institutions, and really you need to build resiliency and future preparedness. And if you think about the importance of education, if you think about the importance of governance structures, if you think about how determining incentives can be, unfortunately, those do not support with an understanding of how to make sense and make decisions in our deeply unpredictable world. So one of the reasons for the book, we give executive education programs, we have guidebooks, a lot of content. This is trying to democratize some of these ideas, trying to build, to decrease the barriers of entry to understand concepts which can be quite daunting and often treated in an isolated way, which is simply, how do you make sense of the deep uncertainty and the complexities in our world? If you then are more aware of it, you're going to probably prepare differently. How do you make sure that that's effective and to be anticipatory and to drive effective change if you want to be a change maker? And simply survive if you just don't want to be knocked over by these changes, because a lot is happening and it's a lot of it can be detrimental if you're not aware. And so once the penny dropped for me at how poor and not updated our educational governance and incentive structures are from playground to the boardroom, I felt that it was useful to try and put this in a form it's not a cartoon or a TikTok video, but that is less kind of daunting or expensive than some of the executive education programs or other things we give in a more formal context.
Thank you so much for the interview. I could continue talking with you for another half an hour or even longer. This was Roger Spitz with Disrupt with Impact, his new book. Thanks for watching DruckerTV. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. To everyone watching, continue watching, because very soon we're going to talk about what's next. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Fran. It's a pleasure and honor to be on the Peter Drucker Forum this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you.